Hello, everybody. Great to see you all, and welcome to our session today on data security. A couple of us here from Rubrik, MIT, as well as AWS. So today we're going to go over, we'll do some brief intros, we'll talk about the state of data security as it relates to cloud, and we'll have just more of a panel discussion and hopefully save some time for Q&A at the end. All right, let's jump into it. So as far as, let's do some fun intros. We'll stay anonymous at first. We'll go left to left, I guess. And we'll go, what's your favorite thing to do in Vegas? And then after you say that, tell us about your role and what you do. Start with you.
My favorite thing to do here is live here. So it's easy, right? I'm enjoying less traveling as of late, so that's nice. I am an enterprise strategist for AWS. So we're a unique team within the organization. We're comprised of former customers, mainly CIOs and CTOs who've had large-scale success leading transformations in their prior role. So previous to this, I was at Live Nation Ticketmaster, and I led the all-in migration to AWS that we successfully completed in 2017.
Awesome. Mark.
Gave the name away.
I did.
Oh, yeah, -1. So my favorite thing to do in Vegas is watch sports when people have so much on the line. I'm a big sports fan. There's nothing like watching sports when the stakes are high. And in Vegas, it's higher than just being a fan. It's monetary. So it's always a joy to watch some events like the NCAA tournament, Super Bowl, and many others. I work at MIT, and I lead up the IT department. And I've been there, oh my gosh, in COVID years, I feel like I've aged like a dog. But I've probably been there now close to 15 years in my staff role. And before that, I was an undergraduate. Got there in the mid-90s. And kind of responsible for all things IT. That means, they know you when things are working, and maybe you don't want to be known when they're not. But, kind of everything you could think of from our, key infrastructure, cloud, data centers, communications, and every other kind of application as part of our teaching and learning enterprise. It's definitely an exciting place to work.
My favorite thing to do in Vegas is definitely playing craps. I'll give the hedonistic answer for sure. Second favorite is probably food and shows. Really like to go to Cirque du Soleil shows. My name's Bill Gerling. I'm an architect and a manager here at Rubrik. I've been at the organization for approaching 5 years, and I help launch new products. My background, technically speaking, is in public cloud infrastructure, AWS as a first-class citizen. Great to be here.
And hey, everybody, my name's Louis Ferreira. I'm also with Rubrik, director of our cloud product sales here in the Americas. Been with Rubrik for 5 years, and we're going to transition now to a data security conversation. I'll end by saying my favorite thing to do in Vegas, we all come here a ton, it seems like, for these IT things. Zip line down Fremont Street one time, that was pretty cool. And then saw Chris Angel magic show. Freaking awesome. Like I was front center, felt like I was in the show. That was cool. All right, so let's talk data security and the state of ransomware. So obviously, like, cybersecurity is not a new issue by any means. Some form of ransomware has been around for many, many years now. We live in a day and state where there's literally a ransomware attack every 11 seconds in today's day and age. Every 11 seconds, someone's getting hit. So these attacks have become a lot more sophisticated. New vectors are being exploited, like SaaS and cloud and on-prem and mobile devices and, global workforce, all those things we're dealing with. And even big tech companies are getting hacked, right? I mean, you guys work at two super notable companies with AWS and MIT. So, Mark, I'll ask you first, what do you think has led to this recent rise in ransomware?
It's pretty simple. Just like Vegas, show me the money. And to the extent it continues to be lucrative, to the extent that organizations are forced to pay because they don't have any better alternative to restore, key operations or their business, there's going to continue to be a market for it. And, one thing I'll always say is economics win. And right now, the economics for ransomware are, let's say, extremely favorable in a lot of cases. And I think that's why it's become rampant everywhere you look. And it's rampant mostly because people don't have good strategies for securing their data. If they did, we wouldn't see the marketplace that we do for this. And that means there's a great opportunity for all of us to do better, but it also means we got a lot of work to do too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jake, I'll ask you, from your perspective at AWS, I know you're in a strategy role, you deal with a ton of customers, internal stuff. How does ransomware threaten business continuity from your perspective?
Aside from the obvious, I mean, I think that's a great question. I didn't see the questions ahead of time, just so you guys know. In case you haven't noticed. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge disruptive force. I mean, not only if you get hit by ransomware, but also just the threat of it being there is like so worrisome for so many organizations. They're spending so much time and effort to try to protect themselves. And some are doing a great job, and others are struggling with it. And I think it's going to take a little while before everyone figures it out. Although I think we do have the answers. It's just a matter of just educating the greater world as to what those best practices are that actually work.
Yeah, we're seeing attackers exploit, human behavior. They're getting smarter. Like I said, they're attacking new vectors. And unfortunately, despite best effort of using best practices and configurations and leveraging world-class tools, perimeter defense, cloud security, infrastructure security, like the attacks are still getting in. There's a high-profile attack in the news, it seems like every other day now. So obviously the infrastructure security is like absolutely essential. You can't leave the doors and windows of your house, open, as we like to say. But Mark, would ask you back here to share some light on, once an attacker gets in, how do you stop them from taking your business down and holding the data hostage? You have to almost assume breach. So what's your perspective there?
Yeah, I think of one of my favorite movies, Fight Club, and one of the early scenes where over a long enough timeline, the survival rate for everybody goes to 0, right? And over a long enough timeline, this is going to happen to you. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I think from that standpoint, you've got to do everything we can to try and be prepared for them. But it's just such a remarkable kind of situation when one of these things happen. I won't go into all the details, but just to take a more recent one that we had something where someone, of course, and let's always highlight, the hardest thing is not the technology, the hardest thing is people. And our greatest link in this security puzzle remains the human element, right? And if people didn't click on those links or type in their password and their email address to get a free raise or whatever it is, we wouldn't necessarily have these things. I may have tried that too, depending on how big the raise was. But there's just an incredible plethora of things we're just kind of put in front of us in terms, and every one of them is a risk, right? So for all of us up here and all of you in the crowd, you have to be perfect at your job, right? All they have to do is to just succeed once. And that's a pretty daunting set of odds. It's better than any odds of the house in Vegas even, right? So when you think about it, it's just remarkable, what you're kind of faced with. So they get in there, and often they prey upon what I'll say is just lack of understanding of an environment, lack of, configuration, best practices, whatever you want to call it. And I think they really taking advantage of just vulnerabilities in our culture. I think technology is a big part of it, but I think culturally we have a big, step that we need to take around understanding that these things are important. These are mission critical assets, and we got to manage them as such. But every one of us has a role to play in that, right? That's not just the central IT department's job or the IT guy's job. Everybody is part of that attack surface, and I think that's where the interesting work happens, and that's where we have a lot to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Bill and I work closely together. We meet with, it seems like dozens of customers every week that are, like you all, rapidly and widely adopting cloud. And you have a C-level, initiative to go to the cloud faster, digitally transform. And at the same time, you end up fragmented because anyone doing anything meaningful in the cloud is running, services typically across dozens or hundreds of accounts or cloud subscriptions. The attack surface naturally gets wider. You have in larger orgs, shadow IT consuming services that sometimes is outside of IT's, vision. Jake, I'd ask you, you see this every day. How do you think cloud platforms like AWS play a role in the challenges as well as the solution to securing the data in the cloud?
All right, that's a good way to ask the question, because there are both, right? So the challenges, cloud's kind of a double-edged sword. It's ultimately a good thing if you're not using cloud. Your competitors are, and you're not going to be able to compete with them, and you're not going to be able to serve your customers. But with that power comes responsibility, right? And so just as it's easier to spin up, 1,000 instances of something, it's just as easy to delete 1,000 instances of something, right? And so you have to understand that you have that super leverage, right? So understanding that you have that and understanding that if somebody compromises your your account and you have everything in one account, your backups are in that account as well, that's kind of checkmate, right?
Right.
So the way that you do that is you realize kind of what the technology is, what the capabilities are, and you have to not air gap, but kind of simulate air gap to some degree, right? So short answer is your backup data better be in a different place than your production data, and the same credentials better not be able to access both, right? That's kind of the short answer. If you can create that kind of real separation, and ideally, you shouldn't even have the same people have access to the backup data. Right. And you can do that with, we have great technology with MFA, like with multiple MFA tokens that you can do really elaborate things. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was a customer, the kind of analogy we used to kind of explain it to non-technical people was like when you watch a movie and they're launching the nukes, right? The president has one key and someone else has the other key, and both keys have to be turned before those get launched. I would suggest implementing something like that for your mission critical data to delete a backup copy, for example, or even decrypt a backup copy, and that's very easy to do in the cloud. Absolutely.
And Bill, I know one thing we're always talking to customers about is that inherent just like lack of visibility and control that exists across all those accounts and surface area. What's your opinion on ensuring security across all these multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, environments, AWS? Give your take there.
Yeah, I think you've got like a three-pronged problem to begin with, right? So you've got like an increasingly remote workforce that is decentralized in nature. It sort of inherently introduces 24/7 ops to your organization just by nature of sort of sprawling the workforce out. You've got the requirement for remote access. If you look at the compromise vectors, sort of historically speaking, RDP was like number one, I think, up until maybe the past year or two, where we've started to see phishing and social engineering exceed those vectors. And then you've got this sprawling technology stack as well. So you've got on-premises sort of traditional infrastructure, commercial off-the-shelf type apps, three-tier apps. Maybe you've got these cloud-native architectures that you're beginning to adopt that Jake sort of alluded to. They've definitely got a very different look and feel to them, and provisioning and sort of op stack to them than your data center-based applications. A lot of folks are flipping stuff directly into software as a service now as well, and so you're still responsible for the data there, but you've sort of got one hand tied behind your back while you're fighting in a SaaS world a lot of the time. And so really what you've got to look for is you've got to look for a tool set that is going to give you that observability across all of these different platforms and architectures, and you've got to look for one that isn't so laborious to architect and implement that it's going to diffuse itself before it's even implemented. So I would say something that can give you a consistent policy model, something that can auto-discover even in these different architectures and auto-protect, something that is capable of relaying events and audit trails out to SIEM and SOAR platforms. A security tool is only as good as how well it's architected and how utilized it is. And if people are constantly trying to sidestep it or forgetting about it, then it's not going to be beneficial to you. And then outside of that, like then there's all of the technology hardening and sort of technology widget pieces that you just need that are almost becoming table stakes these days, right? So an immutable air-gapped copy, a time series of recovery points that go back a sufficient amount of time so that when you realize you've been compromised by one of these threat actors, you can threat hunt back in time and find a known good copy. And then something that also offers you the ability to not only recover a good copy, but to quickly and in a highly orchestrated manner recover a good copy, and to recover that copy wherever you need it to go. It may need to go to a clean room for forensics. It may not need to go right back into production. You may want to download an offline copy. You may not even have a system to restore it to. So all of these things, like you have to war game it out, because all of these things are kind of considerations that you may not come up against until you're in the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, obviously, MIT is thought of as certainly probably one of the most forward-thinking organizations in the globe, thought leadership in many areas. Just operationally, like you don't need to get into the underlying tech, but are there any best practices or operational workflows you follow to secure data across all these different environments you're running in? Any kind of rules or pillars you govern the team by to day to day?
Yeah, I mean, I like how you described cloud as kind of almost like a weapon of mass destruction, right? Weapon of mass opportunity too. But, I think one of the big challenges for us, and, I think too frequently people kind of look at cloud as, it's just where your servers are running. It's moving from your data center to somebody else's. And that really misses, I think, in fact, the biggest part of it is just, it's a true cultural change. And I think, every organization, ours included, I think everyone in this room, whether we call it digital transformation or whatever we want to use, is going through that journey. And I think that just means you have to really start to almost, I don't want to say necessarily from scratch, but just a complete rethink of kind of how you do things. And so for us, we're a traditional IT organization, long-standing, which means we have, a bit of a legacy IT environment. We're not a greenfield like a Netflix or something like that. But it really meant we had to kind of start to look at, what does this mean for us? And I will say, the journey we've ultimately gone on versus what we thought we were going on is a far cry from where we started. But I think the other big piece of that is just trying to create a culture of empowerment and a culture of accountability, right? And I think one of the great things cloud really does is it kind of tears down a lot of what I would say some of the more traditional silos have been in IT service delivery. And really, DevOps is kind of, the buzzword we all hear, but, what that really means is the traditional silos of, someone develops something, someone deploys something, someone operates something, those have all become blurred, right? But that means, well, you could do things a heck of a lot faster than you could before, right? And you have all these tools of programmatic infrastructure, but you really got to create a set of principles about how you're going to go about using these powers, right? Because to his point, used poorly, you could unlock your own Armageddon. And so we've really done everything we can. We've kind of stood up a whole new team to really look at cloud. And they've kind of been driving us. It's a new culture. It's really hard to create a new cultural way of doing things within an existing cultural enclave. Very, very difficult to do. And so I'd really encourage folks to think about as they go down this journey, really think about how do you create a new opportunity for a new culture to develop. And what are the principles you want to use to govern that? And ours is really about speed. It's about security. And it's ultimately about meeting the needs of the community we service at MIT, which I can tell you can be a little bit demanding. But it's really about empowerment because the ability to do all these things today is at their fingertips. Before it would have been 4 or 5 different handoffs. Today they have the ability to do that. And so I think we really have to look at how do we empower our workforce to make sure they're using these tools and they understand that they're a key part in this puzzle.
Yeah, there's such a propensity for assumptions with all the silos being torn down. That's one thing that I find when I talk to our customer base is a lot of times people will just assume that because there's an SLA tied to a service, it's always encrypted or it's always backed up or it's always multi-zonal or whatever. And so like really fostering that trust but verify as you learn culture is so important because especially with a platform like AWS, things are well documented most of the time, almost all of the time. And that documentation is at your fingertips, but people just assume, hey, let me look up the SLA for this service. Okay, I'm good, I'm covered. But those data sets are still your responsibility, right? You want a second copy of those somewhere. You want to introspect those data sets and find out whether or not there's anomalous patterns in the data or in the access of the data or whatever. And we, as folks consuming these services in go fast mode, we have this propensity to focus on the shiny thing that's off in the distance and not necessarily like what we're going to trip over that's right in front of our feet.
Yeah, and Jake, you have such an interesting vantage point because you're dealing with customers that spend probably tens to hundreds of millions a month to customers that are like just starting to put their first app or build, in cloud for the first time. And with that wide range, it must be just super interesting to like kind of guide those folks. And I'm just wondering if, from an AWS perspective, like, is there a standard kind of model or guidance you give customers? Is it more form to fit based on where they are? Are there governing, principles or architectures you're typically recommending?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's going to be differences between, like a brand new kind of startup, and a Fortune 500 enterprise, right? And then there's going to be differences across their stages of adoption as well. But the principles are pretty much, I wouldn't say the same, but very, very similar, right? Cloud isn't a silver bullet. It's actually something better than a silver bullet. It's just an amazing set of tools that just completely supersede what we've been dealing with our whole careers. And I think that realization isn't, people have stages of realization when it comes to that as well, right? Like Mark was saying, like moving your data center to the cloud is an anti-pattern, right? You're basically just going to end up with a more expensive data center, and you're going to miss out on the benefits, right? So
sign a big spending commit, lift and shift it all.
And I'm a fan of lift.
Good for Amazon.
I think lift and shift is great because it gets you to the cloud quickly, but that's not the end, it's the beginning, right? And then you have to start refactoring. And some people think that refactoring is a phase 2, but it actually ends up being part of your operations forever, right? And that's a good thing because it means you can improve things forever. Of course, you're going to get diminishing returns after a while, but new technology is coming out all the time. I can't tell you how many services AWS has. I'm sure it's going to be more after this week. But those services are also getting new functionality, like on almost daily basis. And they're maturing, right? And so what you're doing when you adopt cloud is you're investing in your future ability to make better decisions, right? Because like AWS is going to continue to develop and make our services more secure, with better functionality, less expensive. All of these things are trending over time to be a better experience for customers. And so the cloud that you know today, if you're just starting to migrate, by the time you're there, is going to be a much better cloud anyway. So it's really, the key is to really understand, it's education, it's culture, like Mark was saying, having a culture, if you bring your old culture to the cloud, you're going to have another data center in the cloud also, right? So you have to really think about what are these new capabilities, understanding what they are, and this is for leadership as well as engineers, to really understand not just the words, but the concepts, and then take advantage of it. And if you do that, I think it could be all benefit, really. I mean, the downside comes from lack of understanding, not following best practices, and not really understanding, taking your old operating model and moving it to the new world with this new technology.
Yeah, and obviously I know we have some customers in the audience, like obviously Rubrik helps secure, observe the data in the cloud, recover it from ransomware, provide resiliency, all those types of things. And a lot of times customers come to us and they're like, well, hey, I don't think AWS could get breached. And it's like, the problem is not AWS getting breached, it's your admin account getting compromised because you haven't set the right security parameters around MFA and well-architected framework and following all the kind of best practices there. And folks get breached. So it becomes not a matter of like, if you're hit, but when you're hit, how do you avoid paying the ransom? And even sometimes when you pay the ransom, we've read these in countless case studies, like they don't give you your data back. They're actually
or they give you a tool that'll decrypt it,
right.
10 years from now, something like that. Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk more architecture strategy. Mark, could you tell the group here just kind of how you guys secure your data at MIT and your strategy there as it relates to cloud?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's always about defense in depth, right? So multiple layers of protection. I think you're going to absolutely need an ability to recover rapidly. Whether that's your developers made a mistake or they pushed the wrong information to the GitHub repository or whatever. Sometimes you need the ability to recover fairly quickly, and that's going to involve something probably very close or sit proximately to where you do your service delivery or your computation. Beyond that, though, you start to look at other kinds of things about, hey, this availability zone might not be here. Worse, this region may not be here. Worse, this cloud might not be here, and kind of work your way down the list. I mean, I think of an easy one. One of the greatest denial of service attacks I ever saw was when US East had an S3 outage, right? Half the internet went down across the United States. I don't know if folks saw a map, but like every website and SaaS provider you've ever thought of, even rendering their web page for their company didn't work. And so you have to really think about that. So I think you ultimately end up with what I think of as data kind of living everywhere. And for us, one of the challenges we have is we have to play in multiple clouds, right? And one of the great things you learn about transitioning to cloud is it's very easy to put your data into the cloud. They make it very easy to put your data into Amazon. They make that nice and simple and free. To take your data out or to move your data around, very expensive. And so what we end up with is for every cloud we play with or we work with, you're probably going to have a copy of your data. And I think that's an advantage in terms of your resiliency strategy because you have data in multiple places. I think at the same time, there's cost considerations. There's more attack surface from a security perspective and others. But I think, I hate to say it, but you still probably need cold storage too. And that's always a part of the plan. Break glass in case of disaster, that's your break glass scenario. And I think that's still, even to this day and in the future, will be part of the puzzle.
Totally agree with you. Obviously, we live in this world where the infrastructure teams and the security teams have sort of always historically been separate silos. We now live in a place where recovery is about data security. You have to have these teams working together and literally have tools that enable that cross-functional interlock. So Jake, I'd ask you, how do you think, or what's AWS's perspective on how IT infrastructure operations and security teams should be bridged together to kind of share that common goal of data security?
Well, we believe that security is everyone's responsibility to some degree, right? And even that includes every single user within the company, right? Don't click on that email that has a funny domain name, right? That sort of thing. You probably didn't win a brand new car and just learning about it through email from someone you've never heard of. I mean, so there's a lot of education. And if you have users that aren't educated to that degree, then it's going to be very, very difficult for InfoSec or infrastructure to protect the company, right? That's the bottom line, because there'll be just so many backdoors, and that's true in the cloud or outside of the cloud. There's so many different models for this to work. The way that when I was a customer, the way we implemented was InfoSec was more of kind of setting policies, and infrastructure was more enforcing those policies or building to those policies. And that's a way for kind of those two teams to coexist in a way that's harmonious, I would say. But I mean, the thing is, we could say DevOps, we could say DevSecOps, we could say DevSecFinOps. Where does it end, right? It ends where essentially those lines are just becoming blurred across more and more domains. And I would say security has to be baked into every single one of them. And that's how we do things at AWS, right? So every team is responsible for security. Every service has security built into it. So we have a saying, build it in, don't bolt it on. So that's one of the big differences between security in the old world and in the new world. In the old world, you'd have this soft-boiled egg where you're vulnerable on the inside and you just try to put a big moat around it, right? And don't let anyone in. But once they get in, it's a free-for-all. Well, the great thing about cloud is every single component has security controls built into it. Right. So you don't have to have that moat. You could still have that moat around it, and people do that. And I see people in the cloud put Cisco firewalls around it. If that's what makes you sleep well at night, right, you could do that. But take advantage of the security that's built into every single service that we offer, and that's going to give you the best protection.
Yeah, Bill, what do you think about this integration between data security and IT operations, and any additional thoughts you'd add?
Yeah, well, I think that to Jake's point, you need to be considering it from all angles, right? So when you're provisioning, you're now provisioning infrastructure and applications in this sort of pipeline-driven, highly automated manner, right? And so you should also be toggling the necessary security controls on, applying the necessary protection policies, so on and so forth as part of that provisioning process. Excuse me. But then you'll also need to monitor and maintain that posture going forward. And then if we live in a world where we assume breach, another time those two teams are going to come together is in that breach scenario, right? The security team is going to want to be determining the blast radius, determining the initial point of infection, how did lateral movement occur, so on and so forth. So they're going to be sort of doing their own reconnaissance and investigation, trying to figure out where it started, how far it spread, and what the current state is before they even worry about bringing the business back online. But IT Ops is going to want to restore operations immediately. And a lot of times the security team is going to need assets and artifacts from the IT Ops team in order to conduct their analysis. And the faster that the IT Ops team can enable these sort of sandboxed investigation type workflows, the faster they can get the go-ahead from the security team to actually go begin repatriating workloads into the DR site or into production or whatever. So what it really comes down to is the operator's tooling needs to support these patterns of application and architecture sprawl across many different delivery models and architecture models. But then also they need to hook their tooling into the tooling that someone in the SOC is going to use, right? So like our logs and our audit trails should end up in the SIM platform. If you're going to utilize an operator's tool to recover, then that operator's tool should be accessible by whatever workflow engine that the SOC analyst or whomever is going to use to begin conducting their investigation. Similarly, we have this time series of data in these data protection, data management type platforms. We need to be able to look into those data sets and say, hey, is there sensitive data in here? Because a real common thing in a ransomware attack is like, let's say I've got a good copy and I'm going to recover anyway, and I can recover. What are they going to do? They're going to double extort you, right? They're going to find HIPAA data, they're going to go post it on the dark web, they're going to send you a screenshot, and they're going to say, pay me anyway, or I'm not taking it down. And you look at some of these incident response firms, that's like one of the big things that they do is they go like scrub the dark web and they try to ascertain whether or not there's private data leaked into these platforms. And so I would just say that like not only do we need to consider security in all things that we do, but we need to consider the synergy of those teams, both at provisioning time, in day-to-day ops, and also in this assumed breach scenario where we're trying to recover.
Yeah, totally agree, Bill. When we look at just the importance of like data security overall, there's always been this overarching term of like cybersecurity, and we think perimeter defense, keep the bad actors out, build the walls high. Wondering from your perspective, Mark, if you at MIT, do you look at cybersecurity and like perimeter defense as separate than the inherent like security at the point of data or data security? What's your overall feeling on that, and just general view of data security and infrastructure security, and kind of how those two worlds play together or separate?
Yeah, it's been changing a lot the last couple of years. We had this pandemic, thrown upon us. But I would say, it used to be traditional security thinking was, build bigger walls or thicker walls or faster walls or whatever you want to call them. And, everything kind of on the inside was part of the family or part of the, circle of trust. You think of Robert De Niro. And that was kind of the modus operandi of security for many years. But to your earlier analogy, we used to consider it like a Twix bar. It was hard on the outside and chewy and squishy on the inside. And it doesn't lead to good culture, I think, just traditional kind of security practices around the firewall-centric mentality people have had for many years. And I think now one of the challenges you have is, well, you can't build a wall around the world, right? So if you're using Amazon, if your workforce is working from home or from convention center here or anywhere, remote work, this pandemic, everything has kind of changed and probably accelerated, I'd say by probably 10 to 20 years, something that was going to take a lot longer. And probably we would have had a lot more time to think about how to do it right. And we had to figure out how to do it, well, in 3 to 6 months. And so I think for us, just our thinking around security at MIT is kind of broadened. And, you need to have security, I think, at the point of interaction or at the point of attack, across your entire ecosystem. And that includes your cloud products, that includes your end users, that includes your software as a service. It kind of includes everything. But there's no way to really build a wall around it anymore. I think you really want to build good tools, good analytics, a good understanding of what's happening at your points of interaction. And that's really where we try to focus things as much as we can. I'd love to have an inventory of all of MIT's data assets. I think that would be fantastic. Haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. But I think that's one of the other challenges, especially in an environment like ours, is people are producing intellectual capital everywhere and anywhere they go. Right. Could be on their phone, could be on their laptop.
I know, just think about the definition of an endpoint. Yeah. Like if you think about an endpoint 5 or 10 years ago and an endpoint today.
This wasn't on the list.
Like it used to be like you got a company issued laptop or maybe a desktop, maybe you had a smartphone, those are your endpoints. And now you start to think about like what an endpoint, I mean, it could be a container running in the cloud somewhere, it could be an IV pump in a hospital, it could be someone's refrigerator dispensing water.
Car.
You know what I mean? And I mean, some of these are admittedly extreme examples, but within every organization, MIT or a healthcare organization or a finance organization, like these like highly regulated entities, you think about just the attack surface and the perimeter that you might have to try and defend. And it's like, yes, you want to build those tall walls, but really what you want to do is begin building like a behavioral baseline and interaction point baseline and very quickly identify anomalous behavior so that you can intervene. Because trusting that you're always going to just keep the bad actor out is a fool's mission these days.
Almost impossible. I think one of the great things to come to the security arena is cloud itself, right? I think one of the biggest challenges we've always had is you have all these SIMs and other systems generating tremendous amounts of data, yet to make information out of it because of the volume is almost impossible. By the time something bad's happened, it would take you 2 weeks to figure it out. And so for the first time, we have the computational capabilities, the machine learning capabilities, all sorts of new tools to bring to the table to start to try and get ahead of the curve a little bit. And I don't think we've even really touched on those yet. I think it's still early days, but I think the future is actually a lot brighter in terms of trying to recognize anomalous behavior and things like that. Because today, we may have the data that shows that behavior is anomalous, but we couldn't figure that out for a very long period of time.
Right, and what's a false positive, what's a true positive, right? Even if you can analyze it
Yeah.
all. And I mean, the cloud services that like AWS provides, they give you some aptitude for handling the massive amount of data that you have to parse through, but it's definitely coming to a point in time now where you have to use like AI and ML type services to weed through it all and really begin to determine what's true, what's false, what should I investigate further, what is noise.
Jake, you brought up some really good points earlier around just from an architecture standpoint, like taking backup data out of one account into another, logical air gap, like different credential access on that source point, moving data around. Would love your opinion on if bad actor gets in and breaches a customer's like AWS account, gets admin access, whatever, and starts doing malicious things, like what's the blueprint for the recovery workflow, the ransomware recovery? Like, talk to us about that. They followed the best practices, the data's out, like that's the advice there, but how do we go ignite the recovery?
I think the best case scenario is, and again, there's a spectrum of cloud adoption, right? All the way from people building data centers in the cloud to people being 100% serverless, right? We have a saying in IT that related to cloud, cattle, not pets. Basically, like when it relates to servers, right? You don't name your servers anymore. If you're doing it right in the cloud, you're not naming your servers. They're ephemeral. Like if they just crash, then it's a non-issue, right? And so I think the closer you get to that, and it applies to more than just servers. This can apply to whole AWS accounts. This could apply to whole environments, right? When you get to this kind of everything is ephemeral, everything is, can come and go out of existence. We don't have servers that are running 24/7 anymore, right? The farther you get towards that, the less you really need to worry about all of this because, you just have, you have a master copy that everything is being generated off of, and it's in a secure place. And if something gets compromised, then you just delete it, or it automatically gets deleted. And ideally, you have AI behind, detecting those things. And then in the future, I predict this will all be automated and it'll all be as a service from cloud providers. And we're kind of halfway there at this point, right? It still takes some expertise to implement it. But I think when you get to that level of maturity where perhaps most of your environment's serverless, the things that aren't are containers and they're ephemeral and they, on spot instances, they come and go. Another example would be, for disaster recovery, we're used to thinking of primary region and backup region. Well, what if there wasn't a primary? What if you don't care which region your data lives in? What if you can move it seamlessly from one region to another? When you have that, it gives you kind of the freedom to worry less about these things. Now, of course, we live in reality and most people are still transitioning to that. Sure. And that's why I recommend things like having multiple accounts. I'm a proponent of having as many accounts as, have an account for every application, right? Because when you start treating them like cattle, not pets, having 10 of them or having 10,000 of them should be roughly the same amount of overhead. The big difference comes from having 1 or 2 or 3 to having enough to where you can't manage that way. And so for those people, then just having clear separation, like I was saying before, multiple factor authentication with multiple people having to agree. And this is one of those things where you can do it in such a way where it's pretty much foolproof if you set it up properly, where your master data cannot be deleted. So I think that's kind of like, in the interim, that's going to be kind of the best solution. But for the long term, it's really about getting ephemeral on as many layers as possible. And then having advanced machine learning and AI doing automatic detection, protecting you in the background. And like I said, I think we're about halfway there at this point. It's just a matter, we could take advantage of the capabilities we have today. They're only going to get better in the future.
Yeah, because like Nirvana is, if someone SSHs into an instance, just blow it away. Like, why is someone SSHing into an instance? You don't need to be in there, right? Which is a complete departure from traditional ways of thinking about administering and provisioning.
And it's not a technology limitation. At this point, the technology is there. It's a cultural limitation, like we were saying before, right? People need to be able to wrap their heads around this new way of doing things. And when they do, then we can take advantage of this technology that already exists.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me that's that is the promise of why you're going on this journey, right? Because I think a lot of people look at it, well, I can run it somewhere else, or I could, run it in different ways. But these kinds of capabilities that we're talking about here, you're not going to be able to take advantage of those if you're just running a traditional server workload, right? So the reason we're embarking on these long adventures, I guess, as IT professionals, is there is the promise of a much greater sets of capabilities that we've ever could have imagined, but it's going to require us to change. It's going to require us to grow. It's going to require us to evolve. And I'll say, the cultural lift is significant, but it is worth it because there is no way, the way we've done things traditionally, to get to where we need to get to. There is no there.
Mark, how'd you hear about Rubrik for the first time? Tell us about, how you're using it today, what your perspective there.
Sure. First time I heard about it, well, we kind of embarked on a cloud journey at MIT, going back almost 10 years ago. Our thinking was really, and I just started thinking in general, is, when you're serving a collection of some of the world's best and brightest minds, it's really important to put the best capabilities, the most leading edge capabilities into their hands. And so when cloud kind of came on the scene for us, we really wanted to adopt it quickly. We really wanted to bring those capabilities to our students, our faculty, as quickly as possible and get them out there. So we've been on this journey for kind of like a little bit. And we kind of looked at our portfolio top to bottom and really how do we see the cloud as an opportunity to change how we've been doing things. And very much Rubrik's part of that journey for us. We looked at our traditional tape library, which super cool, right? And think of the movie Eraser, if anyone remembers that far back, where they had this super tape robot. Super cool, right? But you probably don't want to own too many of those, and you'll probably be able to buy it for $50 on eBay about 5 years from now. But we really had to modernize how we do backups, how we protect our data, have a recovery time that takes less than 3 weeks. Would have been a nice start. And we had some incidents. I think one of the things that probably we didn't appreciate enough is as these data sets got bigger and bigger, the recovery times just got longer and longer. And we had a significant data center fire in one of our facilities that resulted in needing to restore a lot of data just from backup from tape. And there were restores going on for, I want to tell you, for at least a month, 2 months. In some cases, just because the data sets a lot of these researchers work with take some of the telemetry data.
Huge data sets, right?
Yeah, telemetry data downloading from NASA, from satellites in real time. It's a lot of data. And so we really looked at it and said, hey, we need to be better than this. There's the opportunity to be better than this. There's new capabilities for the cloud and such to be better than this. And found Rubrik as a great partner to kind of really look at being part of that transition and partnering with us and try to modernize how we do our entire backup recovery and protection, ultimately. And just been an incredible partner to work with. We've been fortunate because I will say one of the things about cloud is it's really complicated. IT was complicated even before the advent of cloud. I think today the landscape is so broad, so complex. It's almost impossible for any organization to navigate that on their own. And you really need a strong network of partners if you're going to be successful, whether that's Amazon or Rubrik, the folks on our teams, TJ, John, others, who all make that happen. It's really it takes a village to make a success in the cloud, and I think Rubrik's been a really important part of that for us.
All right, that's. I'd like to end with some closing thoughts, and then happy to answer questions. But we'll go, Bill, first. Anything you'd like to on this topic in general? I know we've talked about a lot, but any closing thoughts for the audience from you, or anything you'd want them to take away?
Yeah, I would just strongly encourage. I'm sure there's people at various stages of their cloud journey in this room. Some of y'all are probably already operating the way that Jake would sort of paint a perfect picture. Some of y'all are probably just beginning to consume S3 some today. And I would strongly advise that you look at that journey, you look at where you are today, you look at where you plan to be 30, 60, 90 days from now, a year, maybe out beyond a year. I as a technologist say out beyond a year is kind of a fallacy at times, but consider the technologies you're going to adopt, consider the operating patterns that you're going to adopt, and then consider like the security of your data sets, because regardless of the consumption model that you're going to be utilizing, that data is your responsibility. You look at shared responsibility model from AWS or from any of the third parties or other providers out there, like your data is always your data, and your stakeholders are always going to want a holistic view of how protected and recoverable those data sets are regardless of where they live. It doesn't matter if it's email in M365 or if it's a persistent volume on a Kubernetes cluster or if it's a LUN off of a traditional storage array, if it's a NAS workload, shout out to Eric Hanna back there. All of these data sets are important to your business in some way, shape, or form. You should know how important they are. You should know where they reside. You should know whether or not they're protected at provisioning time. And even if they are protected, how recoverable are they? Because so many times we run these tabletop exercises at Rubrik where we go through these like mock scenarios. Assume that something has happened to a retail organization. Let's step through the IT ops and SecOps sort of response process and kind of war game it out. And almost every time, the technology isn't the problem. It's how the technology is configured or how the technology is implemented or, we didn't consider this operating pattern or that operating pattern. And so that would be my advice is just look at the journey. And each time you make a change, either in technology or an operating model, consider the data, consider how you're going to protect it, and consider how you're going to recover it in one of these breach scenarios. Because like the folks on the stage here said today, we live in an assumed breach world. And a lot of times, 5 minutes today will save you 5 hours tomorrow.
Mark, closing thoughts or remarks from you, my man.
Oh, sure. I just reflect back, one, how happy I am to be here today with so many people. This is the most people I've seen in a room probably in 3 years. So, it's nice that the world is starting to, I don't want to jinx it and say the pandemic's over, but it's nice to see a return to things that are more familiar and enjoyable, like human interaction. It's really been incredible. But just reflecting back on the last couple years, the digital world for the first time is as important or more important than even the traditional world, right? That's one thing this pandemic did was it accelerated our evolution as a society by decades. Something by necessity, right? This pandemic forced us all to do things at a pace we would never have done before. And that means every one of you in this room, your role has changed, right? You guys are, traditional organizations, the digital world was a complementary part of the story, right? We were complementary, we're a supporting function, we're infrastructure providers. Right. You guys are the business now. You are the business, right? For the first time. And we're seeing a transition, I think, not just in our respective industries, but across the world, where digital knowledge, understanding of this complex landscape is essential to the leadership of our world for the future. So the future leaders will be a world where the folks look just like you for the first time, right? They won't necessarily look like bankers or accountants or the things we've traditionally seen. They're going to look like folks like you. And what I would tell you is the world's never needed folks like you more. You've never been more important. You're the ones who got all your respective organizations through this pandemic. Like, just think of what you guys did in this last 3 years. It's incredible. And unfortunately, now our organizations want more, right? They want to do more. They want to do faster. And so what I would encourage everybody here is we're faced with a time of unprecedented change, but don't necessarily fear that. This is a time of unprecedented opportunity, okay? And each and every one of you, I encourage you to embrace that opportunity. It's going to bring us challenges, data security, complex landscapes, all sorts of new threats and actors and things we could even probably never imagine years ago. But the opportunity we have, each one of us here, to really provide a better future for our respective organizations and our society is truly, truly unique. And I just encourage all of you to embrace it. I feel truly blessed. I've been fortunate to work with a great group of people throughout this pandemic. Think of my folks like Olu and Claudia and others, but I'm sure each of you have folks you've kind of developed really just wonderful relationships with this last couple of years. And I encourage you to leverage that, to build on that momentum, and really seize this opportunity that you all have in front of you, because there's nothing ever been like it before in our society.
Yeah, great. Jake, to you, closing remarks or thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, I'll keep this short because I'd love to hear from the audience if we have time. Echo what Mark said. I mean, this is our industrial revolution. That's not just, it's not an exaggeration. I mean, imagine being around when the light bulb was invented. And we still got a lot of runway left. So it's still the beginning. It seems like we've been at it a while, but it's still the very beginning. So it's an amazing opportunity. One of the biggest benefits of cloud from a security perspective is just knowing what you have. I ran IT for a number of years. We never really knew what we had, how many servers we had, how much storage we had. I mean, you asked the data center people, they'd give you a different answer than the systems people, and then security people thought a different answer, right? We never knew until we moved it to cloud and we were able to see it. So you can't protect what you don't know about. I'd say it's one of the biggest advantages of cloud from a security perspective. And then in terms of success in the cloud, when it comes to security or anything else, education is really like the best thing you can do. Your capabilities and your success in the cloud is going to be directly proportionate to the level of skill and the level of education that your teams have in the cloud. So, I've engaged with over 700 large enterprises in the last 4 years, and I've seen kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, what works and doesn't work. Yep. And I could say that, the ones that are successful are the ones that educate and invest in their teams. Doesn't mean you can't outsource if you want to. There's very specific ways I think that works better than others, but investing in your teams and getting them educated, they're going to be the key to your success. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, my closing remarks are just really enjoyed the convo today. I appreciate all three of you. Couple housekeeping things. Come check out our Rubrik booth. It's on the level 2 in the Venetian. And then we're doing a Rubrik happy hour food event Wednesday night, 6:45 at Tau. All right, guys, we're wrapping. We'll be hanging out after. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate you coming out.